Hello and welcome to the Spike podcast. I'm Fraser Myers and I'm delighted to be joined as ever by Spike's editor, Tom Slater.
Hello.
And from GB News, Inaya, Folarin, Iman.
Hi.
Coming up on today's show, Elon Musk, the English Channel crisis, Kanye West and Daniel Radcliffe. So Elon Musk, the deal of the century, buying Twitter has gone through. Tom, what have you made of the sort of meltdown in response to it? I think, the response hasn't exactly been restrained, has it? I think it's fair to say.
It hasn't. And it's just been a replay of what happened when this deal was first mooted earlier this year, where you have an awful lot of pearl clutching, a kind of sense that we're now teetering on the brink of civilizational collapse because a different billionaire owns this particular platform. And I think it does just prove Musk and his supporters' kind of underlying point, which is it's clearly become a very politicised platform, and therefore who owns it and whether or not they want to make it a more free space, as Musk claims to do, is therefore seen as a kind of threat to these people. It is worth dwelling on just how over the top this response is. I mean, broadly speaking, he's floated all kinds of different ideas of what he wants to do with Twitter, some of which I'm sure we'll get into. But his whole pitch is essentially that it should be a freer place. He's even made a point of saying it shouldn't be a kind of complete free-for-all hellscape in his words, so I wonder what that means. But at the same time, probably about as free as it was back in like 2015 or something, before they started banning presidents, purging accounts en masse and so on and so forth. And that was enough to spark the mother of all meltdowns. I remember when it was first announced, and you had that professor from City University of New York, I believe, who said that being on Twitter at this point is like being in a bar in Weimar, Germany, like on the eve of the Nazi takeover. And they really do see it that way. So I think it's just reminded us that these people are really terrified of the prospect of free speech. It really rattles them. And whilst it's not as if Elon Musk is going to single-handedly solve the problem of online censorship and we should scrutinise what he's doing and so forth. The accountability problem with these platforms, it shouldn't just rely on which billionaire owns what. But they've proven his point, and even just disrupting that stranglehold that particular censorious set have over these platforms is surely a good thing.
And Inaya, what do you make of this sort of argument? Free speech is fascism, or free speech leads to fascism inevitably. I mean, it's absurd.
Oh, it is really absurd. And I mean, if we just think back at what a lot of people that have been worried about the direction that Twitter and other social media companies have gone on are saying, is that just some transparency in terms of how the policies are applied, some consistency in terms of how the policies are applied, for it to be less politicized, censoring people disproportionately from one side of the political spectrum, and just a greater openness and freer experience when it comes to expressing your particular viewpoints. And to essentially be hostile to that is really telling to how biased it really has been. They're essentially effectively admitting that. Now, as Tom said, I don't think that Elon Musk is some kind of silver bullet savior, but already we have seen in the last few days the way that he has been operating differently. He often will ask questions to his followers, and lots of people engage. He'll reply to them. Some people might argue that that's a much more democratic and open way of discussing the future of the social media platform. What is the problem with that? And I think it says more about them than anything else.
I mean, it's interesting how a lot of people have started to speak a lot more freely, even though the policies kind of if they haven't officially changed. Is that just people getting a bit of bravery back? Is that the chilling effect is sort of going away of knowing that you might be censored one day?
Well, I think that the chilling effect is a very real thing. If you feel that there's going to be horrific consequences, you're going to be unpersoned and censored, then you are going to watch what you say, not in a polite or considerate way, but you're not actually saying what you think. And so ultimately, what many free speech advocates say is that light is the best disinfectant, so to speak. So we want people to say what they think, say what's on their mind, and we can then make judgments out in the public sphere.
And Tom, there's been an interesting revelation this week that you've written about that suggests that a lot of the kind of big tech censorship we talk about isn't entirely just driven by big tech, by Facebook, Twitter acting independently of the state.
Yeah, so this was a big piece of investigative journalism, The Intercept, which was published on Halloween, I think, and fittingly sort of scary revelations. These are things that we've kind of seen glimpses of previously, but it just laid it out in real stark detail, which is essentially the close relationship, particularly between the American security state and the big tech platforms. So in the run-up to the 2020 election, regular meetings were taking place between the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and companies like Twitter, Facebook, Microsoft, and so on. There was even a dedicated portal that was set up that would allow officials to flag particular pieces of misinformation as they saw it to Facebook itself. Even according to some court documents that The Intercept have uncovered, there were indications that there might have been a more direct involvement of two previously unnamed FBI agents in the censorship of the Hunter Biden expose at Facebook, that some of their direct communications had an impact. That's one of the allegations that are floating around. And I think what you essentially see, which, as I said, there was evidence of beforehand anyway, what with Mark Zuckerberg suggesting that the FBI had paid Facebook a visit before the Hunter Biden story dropped and essentially kind of primed them to respond in the way they did in some ways. It just shows that what we see here is it's never been this kind of these private companies enforcing their own content policies of their own volition. They're being lent on by not just the great and good and the media and general kind of polite society discussion, but by the security services specifically, that in the kind of post-2016 panic, it really kind of cemented these two groups together. And they have been setting out with the express purpose of trying to influence their content moderation policies. Now, of course, you know, the companies involved are saying we still set our own rules. Why wouldn't we talk to the authorities, et cetera, et cetera? But there comes a certain point where big tech has kind of fused with the American security state, and that this isn't as kind of deniers of the importance of big tech censorship, whether they're kind of liberals or a few kind of credulous libertarians repeating that same argument about their private companies doing what they want. It's obviously not that simple. And it also underlines, I think, the fact that whoever owns these platforms, they're still subject to a lot of that kind of pressure. So the question becomes, how much can they resist that level of pressure and those pre-existing relationships as well?
And it's interesting, the kind of range of topics that, you know, they're talking about.
COVID-19,
exactly.
Racial justice, the war in Ukraine. And again, it just becomes very, very sinister. And also in America, you see it as very much part and parcel of the way in which this administration in particular has kind of shifted the discussion away from, it's all about foreign interference and the kind of ludicrous idea that Russian bots swung the election single-handedly for Trump. It's now very much focused now on what they see as the domestic misinformation threat, you know, which you see reflected in Biden's rhetoric around domestic terrorists and the MAGA Republicans and so on and so forth. And even they spoke to FBI or security service officials who said they actually in 2020, they got moved off of foreign interference and onto what was seen as sort of domestic social media accounts. So it is just essentially outsourcing censorship to the private sector, getting around the First Amendment. And if this doesn't show people that big tech censorship is a big problem for free speech and democracy, I don't know what else will, really.
Yeah, and I think I welcome the fact that this is obviously a left-wing publication, The Intercept, but it is concerning in the sense that so many on the left have really turned a blind eye to this for so long, and many people from across the political spectrum have been trying to raise awareness about the fact that when you apologize for, endorse the censorship of big tech companies, all you're effectively doing is empowering unaccountable power centers within society to actually censor and define the boundaries of acceptable speech. And it is sad because it has only really confirmed what a lot of people had been worried about for several years, whether that was around COVID-19, you know, the way that the lab leak theory was censored, but also Hunter Biden's laptop, and so on. And I think it also undermines this argument that, you know, just it's a private company, just ignore it. Actually, well, if a private company is intimately woven in the way that the state is operating to manage its citizens, and I do think that it is entirely legitimate and in fact a moral imperative to make sure that there is accountability and democratic scrutiny over that.
As well as, you know, the kind of anguish over Elon Musk taking over Twitter, as well as it simply becoming a freer place. A lot of people are upset that they might have their blue ticks taken away, or they might have to pay something like $8 a month for a blue tick, which implies that other people might be able to have one.
You do say they feel like their blue tick is their birthright as it's a status symbol. How dare you charge me for it? Was it Priyam Vadagopal said that was the only thing standing between her and physical attacks? And things like this.
Yeah.
And you think, you completely lost the plot. One thing, you know, I don't know if it's a good idea or a bad idea. Obviously, at present, it does sort of just serve the role of being a bit of a status symbol. Also, just anecdotally, I do get the sense that in recent years, it's been quite difficult for certain types of journalists to get that designation, whereas for other people, it seems to be granted very quickly. But
There seems to be some journalists on the right side of things that have only a few thousand followers, 2,000 followers, and they got that blue tick.
I do notice that. I've seen a few journalists with like 200 followers.
I managed to get that blue tick. Very, very strange. But one thing I think it underlines, if nothing else, is that Twitter is such, is that even people who are kind of addicted to it and on it all the time and spend their entire lives on it wouldn't pay for it when pushed. Which tells us something, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it seems to be a particularly strange idea. I mean, if people started paying for it, I think it would make them look a bit sad, to be honest. Actually,
like buying yourself, changing your name by deed poll to Lord, or something. Just for
exactly. So I'm not sure it's a good idea from a business point of view. But I mean, the fact that people are, up in arms because they love this way to differentiate themselves from, the ignorant masses. It's just, again, very revealing.
As regular viewers might know, I'm not normally a fan of shaving, but using Harry's for a few months has really got me rethinking. There's no discomfort and the finish is smoother than anything I've tried before. With Harry's, each razor has a carefully weighted handle which gives me more control. And their specially designed 5-blade cartridge means I can get an amazingly close shave without irritating my skin. And the trimmer blade makes it so easy to get those hard-to-reach places. To top it off, Harry's rich lathering gel keeps my face feeling fresh. Basically, Harry's just makes shaving effortless. And by having a subscription to Harry's, I never even have to worry about forgetting to buy any shaving gear. And if I want to adjust or switch up any of the products I get, I can always make any changes directly from the account page. And it's not just blades and shaving gel. Harry's also has a fantastic range of skincare, shower and hair products, and so much more. Once you start shaving with Harry's, you'll never look back. The best way to not miss out is with a Harry's trial set, which Spiked podcast listeners can now get for free. So support our podcast and start your own skincare journey by redeeming your free Harry's trial set today. All you have to cover is £3.95 for delivery. Just head to harrys.com/spiked and get your free trial set and free night lotion delivered to your door. That's harrys.com/spiked. Well, let's turn to the UK, and people are up in arms here, as they always are, particularly about Suella Braverman this week. Tom, she's been the focus of attention previously for sort of dealings at the Home Office for sort of security leaks and things like that. Now it's all about the migrant crisis.
Yeah. And there's so much to sort of unpack with it, I guess, because on that one hand, there is this ongoing attempt. I mean, she is sort of just target number one at the moment in relation to the media. They think they can sort of wear her down with all of these various allegations of minute breaches to the ministerial code and so on and so forth. That seems like the next scout people are going after. So that does cloud things to a certain extent. But I think she also has become the sort of centre of just the whole kind of migration debate, full stop, in a way that has been quite revealing in a lot of ways. So obviously when she got up in Parliament to respond to the genuine crisis on the South Coast in relation to these processing centres overflowing, more than double capacity, the numbers hitting 40,000 already this year, which is a huge rise.
That's for people coming over on the small boats.
Exactly, just over the past couple of years, making an incredibly dangerous journey, if nothing else. And she obviously got up in Parliament, was pretty robust, and you used the word invasion to refer to, and it was obviously a pre-planned line. Now, I do find that talk quite ugly. I think there is a sort of tendency at the moment on the sort of anti-migration right to just insist on using that as a kind of pissing contest, and I don't think it's particularly edifying. But at the same time, you can't help but feel that there is a tendency, people are more upset about her language than they are about the issue that's unfurling on the South Coast, which is very, very serious. And I think it, regardless of where you come at the migration question from, obviously Spike with a very liberal pro-migration publication, this is a state of affairs that cannot continue to go on. It's dangerous. It cannot be uncontrolled. You cannot have something like this just running out of control. And also the fact that I think if people aren't careful, it's going to really undercut the whole argument for liberal migration anyway. Yeah. Because people are refusing to even take this particular thing seriously and act like it's an absolutely fine state of affairs when obviously it isn't.
Yeah, Inaya, what do you make of that? The way that it's not really taken seriously as a crisis, or it's only, if it's a crisis, it's just because the Tories are evil and they hate migrants or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would completely echo what Tom has said. I mean, I wouldn't use the word invasion, and I think politicians are best to avoid that kind of language. And I think it is very unappealing language and just nasty. However, it pales really in comparison to the scale of the problem. And similarly, I have quite a liberal attitude to immigration more broadly. But the idea that tens of thousands of people making a journey that regularly leads hundreds of people to die to get to the UK, where they often have no papers and we have no way of getting to know these people, even processing them. They just disappear into this underground black market where they are vulnerable to exploitation in so many different ways. To me, that's a kind of political, moral catastrophe.
Yeah.
And the idea that this is something that we should not take seriously and systematically try and deal with, I think really does just reveal the shallowness and the hollowness of the political class. And consistently, polls in this country reveal that a lot of people think that this is a really serious issue, want it to be dealt with, but there's just such a contemptuous attitude to anyone that tries to raise it as an issue. And this then ends up, as you said, just breeding a context for, I think, more polarized opinions on it, where people would then want harsher, stronger, more stringent measures because they don't feel like any kind of reasonable discussion can be had on the issue.
I think a reasonable discussion is exactly what we're not having, not because there's so much bad faith as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the actually moments that will have cut through with a lot of people if they did hear any of Suella Braverman's performance in House of Commons, where she talks about, the British public know what's going on. They know that, for instance, all the people coming over are not refugees by current sort of definitions, if you like. That to suggest, as has been revealed recently by Border Force officials, that something like 1% to 2% of the Albanian male population of age 20 to 40 have come over. Not a war-torn country. It's applying to get into the European Union. People see this, and there's an element of just people feel like they're being taken for fools, really. And I think if you want to make an argument for liberal migration, if you want to make an argument for a more generous asylum policy, even safe and legal routes, etc., it needs to be premised on taking the public seriously, winning an argument, and also having actual control over your border. You can't have a border policy if your border is not controlled, whether you want to be restrictionist or liberal or whatever. And I think it's just creating a dreadful situation in which not only does the debate become much more stifled, but also you end up kind of undercutting your own side by trying to take people for fools, trying to just kind of make moralistic arguments that don't actually reflect the reality of what's going on. And in the process of that, not getting to grips with a situation which you cannot allow to continue. This is just something which people have a right to know. People have a right to have input on the policies that their nation, pursue in relation to immigration. A country should be able to democratically decide who they want to join them and so on and so forth. But at the same time, there's also people want to know who these people are. It can't just be uncontrolled. Yeah. And that's something which it seems to have gone by the wayside amidst all the kind of virtue signalling.
Yeah, and just quickly, no one's saying that 35-year-old Albanian men can't ever come to the country. It's just this
particular... They're all wrong uns.
Exactly.
Sort of
it's just this particular route, which is a security threat, a threat to, sovereignty and just basic kind of border controls within society is a problem. Yeah. And can we not at least agree on that basic argument? And
it does just seem to be a sort of labour supply line for criminal gangs. I mean, that was one of the remarks that came out. I mean, it's hard to question the efficacy of it given that there's no sort of data produced or whatever, but Border Force officials suggesting that about half of them kind of show up, claim asylum, then disappear, often go to work in the sort of black market, etc., for about 6 months to a year, and then go back to Albania. This is not people coming here to start a life, to start afresh, to join British society. It's something different, and therefore that obviously needs to be addressed. And it just feels like that honest debate that we need is further away than ever at this point.
I really hope that Rishi Sunak doesn't just, back down, because I think one of the issues that other people that have tried to deal with this issue is that they haven't necessarily got the support they need from the Prime Minister. So that will be, if a U-turn happens, I think that will only strengthen a more restrictionist argument ultimately.
I don't know about you, but I love to travel. It's great visiting new places and seeing all the sights. But to really connect with another culture, you need to get to grips with the language. So before I go back to Spain, I've been brushing up on my Spanish with Babbel. Babbel is a fun and addictive way to learn a new language. Did you know that Babbel's bite-sized 15-minute lessons are designed to be the most efficient and effective way to learn a new language? And Babbel has you covered for all the most popular languages, with courses in 14 different languages, including Spanish, French, Italian, and German. By focusing on natural conversation, Babbel makes learning a language quick and easy. Its interactive lessons aren't done by robots. They're voiced by native speakers using a method based on modern everyday speech. That means Babbel will have you speaking confidently about real-life topics in absolutely no time. So, start your own language learning journey with Babbel today. Right now, Babbel is offering our listeners 6 months for free whenever you purchase a 6-month subscription with the promo code SPIKED. So, go to babbel.com/play and use the promo code SPIKED for an extra 6 months for free. That's babbel.com/play with the promo code SPIKED. Babbel, language learning that works. Now let's talk about Kanye West. For about 4 weeks now, he's been almost constantly sort of spewing these anti-Semitic comments on basically any medium that will have him. Tom, what have you made of it? Because there's sort of two sides to this. There's the horror of what he says, and then there's the actually quite horrible response to sort of cancel him and shut him down.
No, exactly. And you find yourself in a tricky situation whenever you have a kind of instance of cancel culture, which isn't about someone being taken out of context or things dredged up or, you know, people saying something that actually most people find entirely acceptable, but great and good of decide. This is not a case like that. You know, as you say, the things that he's been saying, that tweet about how he wants to go DEFCON 3 on the Jews, and basically, he essentially seems to be convinced that music record executives that inform the media that essentially the Jews have been out to get him in one way, shape or form. He seems to have kind of also pickled himself in sort of black nationalist American rhetoric, which can often be quite anti-Semitic. It seems to be a fair amount of that in what he's saying as well. Also, it's just in a very Kanye West sort of fashion, is very strange, specific. Now, obviously, it's worth saying this man is, even though he denies it, is quite seriously mentally ill. I think that's quite, you know, or at least seems to be going for a tricky time with his mental health at the very least.
He claims it's a Jewish doctor who diagnosed him with that, and therefore it can't be trusted.
To try and bring him down. So that's worth noting, I suppose. But you can't get away from the fact that what he's been saying has been deeply anti-Semitic. I think the problem is that this belief that you can challenge hatred with censorship and unpersoning. Obviously, he's been kicked off of, or at least suspended from, the major social media platforms. All of his various deals have been denied to him. His deal with Adidas, which was big for both him and for the company. There's even calls for, to take his music off of streaming services, and I think Madame Tussauds have taken his his waxwork out because that'll solve the problem. And obviously, no one has a God-given right to lucrative deals and so on. But at the same time, it's just clear that people really think this is the way that you deal with a problem like this. That it is just by censorship, shunning, not really having the argument that you deal with this kind of hatred. And it's clearly done nothing to make Kanye West change his mind. Any of the people who might be looking at him thinking he's got a point are going to feel kind of vindicated, really. If you're genuinely of the view that the powerful Jews run everything, and then surely an instance like this will show they are the one group that you really can't criticise, can you? And especially given the fact that, anti-Semitism is really entrenched in conspiracy theory as well, historically and today. So you really feed those tendencies via censorship. Censorship is a really good way of making nutcases and bigots feel like they're onto something. And I think it's just the worst means possible of trying to... This kind of new form of censorship we have is still very ineffective against the world's oldest hatred in that sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is always just now the default response to any kind of hatred these days. It's just censor, cancel, shut down. It never works, does it? Yeah,
and I mean, obviously, the comments that he made were deeply objectionable. But the kind of arbitrary way in which the kind of reaction seems to me to be quite strange. I mean, he's been essentially deteriorating for quite a few years now. Saying all sorts of things, and actually a lot of the people that are now demanding for his censorship, were almost baiting him for quite a long time, wanting him to say crazy things in interviews and things like that. And so I think it is quite sad that he is now just this figure that is almost just
pariah figure.
Exactly, this pariah figure. And as has been said, censorship doesn't work. He hasn't changed. He's probably now more isolated and paranoid than before. And I think that is a really unfortunate downfall, really.
Let's move on to talk about Daniel Radcliffe. Tom, is this the most ungrateful little shit in...
Yeah, well, he's so as everyone will know, or maybe they don't follow these things as closely as I feel compelled to. But the Potter kids, they're not kids anymore, but the stars of the Harry Potter films, in recent years have made their feelings known about J.K. Rowling's views on transgender issues, by which I mean they've basically joined the pylon against her quite publicly, really collaborated in that fiction that she is some sort of hate monger and whatever. And Daniel Radcliffe gave an interview to IndieWire this week, in which he said he thought it was quite very important the stand that he personally had taken against J.K. Rowling. And I think it's just, first of all, it's just the pomposity of that position is quite funny. I mean, you would have thought that he was, facing down the cops at Selma or something. And what he did was he joined a pylon against a woman who he personally owes a lot to, and also someone who the most she's ever said about the gender issue is that biological sex exists, and it's probably not a great idea to have male-bodied people in rape crisis centres. Yeah. That's essentially the extent of it. And yet acting as if she was some sort of hate-mongering bigot. But yeah, there is an element to you just think, let's face it, whether we're talking about the one who played Harry or the one who played Ron or the one who played Hermione, it's an assemblage of quite ropey talents.
Yeah.
And yet their desire to denounce the woman to whom they own everything over quite spurious grounds is pretty striking. But not to get too caught up on the generational thing, but it is interesting how some of the older stars of that franchise, Ralph Fiennes, late Robbie Coltrane, took a completely different perspective. So you do see that there is clearly kind of a generational aspect to this changing values.
Yeah, and also I just think, what's it got to do with you, Daniel? She is like a grown woman, expressing her views on what is a very live and real debate. The way that he really personalised it, that he's spoken to all these kids and he just felt that there was something he needed to say. It's just so self-indulgent, so self-centred. And as you said, she is really has never said anything that controversial. She's, I mean, some people perceive it as controversial, but she's been saying things that are widely held amongst the population. I'm sure many Harry Potter fans as well.
Yeah.
And it is this very, the way that so many of those younger actors have always see the fans as these almost children, and that in this very kind of infantilized way that they have to be the savior for. And I think that it really just shows that he's ungrateful to someone that is really responsible for his entire career.
I'm just obsessed with this need to denounce people.
Compulsion. And it's so strange as well, because to be on the right side of history, like they feel this need to say, I have to stake out this claim, it's so important, all the rest of it. But what are they doing on the right side of history over there? They're joining a pylon against a woman who's been bombarded with death and rape threats left, right and centre for basically just sticking up for women's sex-based rights. That's the right side of history, but that is the world we live in, unfortunately.
Thank you so much for watching the Spiked podcast. We'll be back next Friday. If you hit subscribe and click the bell, you'll never miss an episode. And in the meantime, why not check out all of Spiked's other videos and podcasts on this channel? And for more Spiked content, find us at spiked-online.com.